Welcome to the #1 show and the source of truth for all things MedTech. Here, we reveal the secrets and stories behind the investments, science, and commercialization of the MedTech industry. Every week, we'll take you on a wild ride with the biggest names in the game, from entrepreneurs and investors who are shaking up the market to healthcare providers who are revolutionizing the way we think and practice medicine. So hold on tight and get ready for a journey like no other. This is the State of MedTech. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show, and this time we have a really interesting episode, especially for those of you who are founders. You see, recent macroeconomic shifts have created pretty much the perfect storm for a shift in funding dynamics, right? If you look at the COVID-19 pandemic, the boom years after COVID-19 from 2021 to 2022, where a lot of SaaS companies were receiving a lot of money, and then now we're kind of like in a SaaS winter that's not only affected SaaS companies, but also MedTech companies in terms of funding. Add to that the SVB or Silicon Valley Bank, crisis, along with other banks having issues, and not to mention all these economic downturns. Like, it's tough to raise money. So in a post-COVID world, healthcare investment has skyrocketed in some ways because it is a very reliable industry. Unlike SaaS, when you look at healthcare and medtech investments, people aren't going to stop needing surgeries, right? And, with both private and public interest in medtech reaching unprecedented heights, there have been new funding vehicles that become available. The government policies promoting entrepreneurial activities started a while back during the Obama years with the Jobs Act, which is Jumpstart Our Businesses Act, which was originally created for healthcare companies. And the idea behind this was financial democratization. Wow, that's a mouthful. Where essentially, it was for companies that were doing a social good, and so healthcare falls into that. Healthcare was very slow to pick up this idea of equity crowdfunding, right, until recently. And really, what this has done is unlocked a pool of really capital eager investors in the public to fund these projects. And what that essentially means is that people who are unaccredited investors, meaning they don't have more than $1 million net worth, just average people, are able to fund these fantastic companies who otherwise may not have made it to market. There's this kind of weird no man's land between when a company is, let's say, pre-seed without FDA clearance and then commercial, where they might have FDA clearance, but they're not commercial, and so venture capital doesn't want to touch them, private equity doesn't want to touch them, and they're generally fantastic technologies. One great example is Monogram Orthopedics, which is a orthopedic robotics company, raised a little over $22 million doing this. And so equity crowdfunding provides medtech startups with an unparalleled opportunity just to kind of tap into this public interest. Not to mention, aside from raising the money, you end up with hundreds, if not thousands, of diehard supporters who are bought into your mission and vision, who will help proliferate that message. So this not only helps gather the necessary funds, it also bridges the gap between innovative solutions and then potential users, and it turns investors into brand ambassadors. So on the show today, we have Kevin Morris. Kevin Morris came as a recommendation through my good friend Nate Harding. Nate Harding is the founder of Exo Bionics, which is a publicly traded bionics company. And most recently, he started Loom, L-U-U-M. I highly recommend you check them out. Loom, just quick little sort of sidebar on them. Loom is a robotics company that is automating the process of eyelash extension placement. Yes, I know it sounds pretty wild, but this whole world of aesthetics and eyelash placement, there is a huge multi-billion-dollar opportunity. Nate, being the entrepreneur he is, saw it and built this amazing team and robotics company around it. I gotta admit, through the automation and the computer vision, this robot, which is literally just automating the process of placing eyelash extensions, is incredibly impressive. So definitely go check them out. And so Kevin Morris is somebody that had advised Nate in the past, and Nate told me about him. So let me tell you a little bit about Kevin Morris. First of all, Kevin Morris is really a pioneer in the crowdfunding space. He's taken, I think, something like 10 companies through their funding rounds. A few of them even went public. And so Kevin is the founder of Atlas Road, which is a full-service agency that partners with founders to help them navigate the process of raising money through equity crowdfunding. And what they essentially do is they help you manage and oversee various partners and functions involved with raising money online, which includes broker dealers, funding platforms, regulatory deal terms, marketing, legal, accounting, all that and above. Because, raising money through equity crowdfunding it could be a very lucrative process. It could be very successful. However, it is also very complicated. And so having the right person to navigate that is important. So prior to Atlas Road, Kevin served as president, CFO, and COO at over 10 different companies, where total he helped raise over $150 million via equity crowdfunding. And so this episode, we talk more about that. And if you're interested to contact Kevin, feel free to shoot him a message at info@atlas, ATLAS -rd.com. That's info@atlas-rd.com, or just check the show notes below and we'll have his information there. So with that being said, we'll get on to the show. And one last thing I want to mention is that if you are a founder who's actually already doing equity crowdfunding, the State of MedTech is very interested in helping you. We have fantastic packages from webinars to podcasts to create that kind of content for you. So if you need help raising some awareness and driving more investors to your equity crowdfunding page, please shoot me a message. Would love to learn more about you, because one thing I love about this show is that it's become a platform to help launch a lot of really fantastic and innovative companies. So with that being said, here's our episode with Kevin Morris. Enjoy. All right, and we're live, man. Hey, Kevin, thanks for joining the show. How you doing?
Good, Omar. It's doing really well. We're both here in Southern California. Can't complain about the amazing weather we're getting.
You know what? Cannot complain about the weather. I can definitely complain about the taxes, but we're not going to do that. I want to be grateful about where we live, But, we got a really interesting episode today because, I think saying that the markets are kind of turbulent today is probably like an understatement of the year. But, you and I met through the equity crowdfunding, channels, and you've done some really impressive work. I know I don't want to take too much of your thunder away, but, long story short, like you've successfully raised a little over $150 million across 10 different companies. You've been a pioneer in the space. And so I want to talk a little bit about like, why is equity crowdfunding a really viable option for a medtech company, right? We'll talk about the pros and cons of it. But before that, give us like a quick high level, like what's your backstory and like, why should people listen to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to kick things off, as you mentioned, I've raised about $150 million through equity crowdfunding over the last 7 years for my own company. So I got into sort of the equity crowdfunding space about 7-8 years ago when it first got enacted in the US. I had a company that I was a co-founder of called Distilled. Now it's on listed on NASDAQ. And we were one of the first pioneers for equity crowdfunding. The business itself was direct to consumer. It still is direct to consumer men's and women's apparel. So we got into the space saying, hey, let's do equity crowdfunding and target our customer base and our mailing list and get them to be investors. Basically build them and turn them into brand ambassadors. We raised about $9 million for our company over a few years. I then left Distilled, worked for one of our investors at Wavemaker Labs, which was a corporate venture studio. There I raised, about $140 million for our companies that I was COO, CFO of over the last 4 years. Those companies are really focused on robotics, food and agriculture robotics, Misa Robotics being probably the most prominent of there, where I helped raise $85 million for So that was kind of over the last 7 years, always been in an operating role for a company and fundraising through equity crowdfunding. And then last year, I decided to start my own consulting firm called Atlas Road, where we're helping manage other companies' equity crowdfunding needs. I've been in the shoes of founders and executives, having seen all the pros and cons of fundraising, running a company, navigating the equity crowdfunding process. And now I'm trying to take that skill set and help other founders, other executives manage the process, because it's not so straightforward. You think it is. And then once you get into it, there's a lot of decisions to make. There's a lot of strategic things you have to do. It's not necessarily straightforward for a first-time company who's raising that way. So at Atlas Road, we help manage the entire process. Think of us as the quarterback for your fundraise.
Got it. Fantastic. Yeah. I think like many years ago, what people don't realize is that I think it was David Wield, who worked under Obama, created the Jobs Act, which I can't remember what his jobs stand for. Do you remember what it stands for?
Jumpstart our businesses.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, jumpstart business. There we go. Yeah, but the main reason for that was for companies doing social good. So very much healthcare. But back then, like however long ago it was, maybe it was 10 years ago now. Healthcare really didn't embrace equity crowdfunding. But then in the last few years, equity crowdfunding has become a really great path to raise money. I think some of the bigger success stories, Monogram Orthopedics raised about $22 million. My friend Adil, who's over Psionic, they're at I think $1.5 million. They're currently doing a raise right now, and while we'll talk about the pros and cons of it. I think the big part about equity crowdfunding that I like is that it gives you an alternative investment vehicle. I have a lot of VCs come on the show. I love the venture capital community, but unfortunately, during turbulent times like this, they're holding to their checkbooks like really tight. And again, I get a lot of flack for this, but I just have to call it out. There's too many VCs out there that have been kind of spoiled by software, right? And at the same time, they want to invest in things that are doing at least 3 to 5 million in run rate per year. And the fact of the matter is, when a company's doing 3 to 5 million in run rate, even if they need to raise money, they're not going to go to you, right? They're going to go to a bigger, more established VC. They're not going to take your money, right? And so we're in this weird time where I think alternative investment vehicles are really, really great. But let's start out with like some of the like a basic question. When do you know that you should do an equity crowdfunding raise as a medtech company?
So that answer continues to change because I continue to see success stories in industries, whether it's medtech, healthcare, or anything else on crowdfunding that I wouldn't even think a few years ago, I don't even think would have succeeded. So I guess at a high level, one of the sort of litmus tests that I like to tell potential clients or people in the space is, do you have a product or a service that can be easily described in 1 or 2 sentences? Is it something that's so esoteric where it takes anybody 5 to 10 minutes to just understand what your company's doing, right? If it's a complicated product or business, it may not quite be the best for equity crowdfunding, because you got to remember, when you're pitching traditional investors, you're in front of them, you're in person, you're on a phone call, you're on a Zoom. There's the ability to walk them through your story and answer questions. With equity crowdfunding, you have 30 seconds, right? You have 15 seconds to pitch somebody. And then if they're not interested, they'll click somewhere else. If they're interested, they'll click through and write and continue to be told the story. So that's kind of traditionally been a very important litmus test, or if you should even look at equity crowdfunding. But, as I've mentioned to you before, as I've started to see, there's a lot of companies out there that are really having successful fundraisers because they may have not the most straightforward product or service they're offering, but they've gotten really good at the storytelling. And that's actually led them to have a very successful equity crowdfunding campaign. Just kind of talking about medtech healthcare, you mentioned Monogram Orthopedics, very successful equity crowdfunding campaign. I've been following them for years. We work with a lot of the same kind of partners. They're surgical robots for joint. That obviously, first of all, makes sense. And then if you see it, there's robotic arms everywhere. So from an equity crowdfunding investor, they see it and they're like, oh my gosh, first of all, this looks cool. There's the coolness factor. And within 1 sentence, I understand what they do. So that's a scenario of sort of a med tech company that's done very well in equity crowdfunding, that has a very straightforward product and story to tell. Another company called Cytonics, I don't know if you've heard of them. They develop diagnostics and therapeutics for osteoarthritis, right? That's actually not very sort of straightforward. I mean, if you don't know the space, you're not really clear on what it is. And if there's like tons of robots, right? They've done very well in equity crowdfunding because they've known to invest heavily in marketing assets and stories. And so that's an interesting point, because you may have great product that's in the med tech space or healthcare space, but if you don't have the right varnish on your storytelling, if you haven't invested in the right storytelling assets, marketing assets up front, you could have the best product in the world. It'll fall flat on equity crowdfunding because the crowd either isn't interested or they don't understand. And so I think that's something where something I always tell founders who are interested in equity crowdfunding. And I'm starting to see that a lot more in the industry. The industry is maturing from the storytelling perspective. And I think that's actually opened up a lot more success stories for med tech and healthcare companies to do well in equity crowdfunding. Whereas in the past, we weren't seeing those sort of wins.
Yeah. And, it's interesting you mentioned, I mean, it's the same thing on the commercial side, which is, I think the mistake that I see a lot of medtech companies make, mainly because they're founder led and the founder is usually a technical person, is there's this belief that like best product wins. And it's a very Silicon Valley
view of things. I mean, you're based in LA, and so I always, feel that, with Silicon Valley has a bias towards product. LA has a bias towards marketing, right? And I don't think one is more right than the other, but in the sense of like raising money and commercializing at the beginning, look, I think we would both agree that Apple is probably one of the most powerful brands on planet Earth with great products. Why does Apple still advertise? Like, why do they take out billboards? Because like marketing is there for a reason. And I think that a lot of technical founders make this mistake of like, hey, look at our patent portfolio on this product, and like it makes sense. But most, I think, investors, whether it's an established institutional investor or even like a retail investor, they want to know that there's like actual commercial traction, because people aren't stupid anymore.
Right. Yeah. And that's a good point to make, because, focusing on healthcare and medtech, you may have a doctor, right, as an example, and I'm overgeneralizing, but a doctor's created this great product that they're trying to fundraise for. And they're an expert in their field, and they will do things that I have no idea, how they do it. But think of equity crowdfunding as saying, all right, I'm a founder, I'm a doctor, right? In order to have a successful equity crowdfunding campaign, I need you, the doctor, to set up your own e-commerce operation, right? Because that's what it is. Equity crowdfunding is like selling stock. It's just selling stock online. It's like asking somebody.
That's a great way to look at it. It's e-com for stock. Actually, that's exactly what it is. I've never heard that before. It's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
e-commerce for stock. Yeah.
But it's more complicated because you have regulatory concerns on the SEC side, right? Not on the medical side. You would, but for the fundraise, you have an audit to do. You have to involve financial and accounting. And so that's not necessarily in the wheelhouse of the amazingly talented doctor who's created this product that wants to fundraise for. And so that's, again, having seen so many success stories in equity crowdfunding and some failures as well, that's the best way I can kind of liken it. And so you see a lot of companies that could have very successful crowdfunding campaigns, but they're not making, that's not necessarily in their mindset. That's not in their wheelhouse to be able to set up an e-commerce operation. Hey, it's like, hey, figure out Shopify, set up your email flow, all that stuff. And so I've seen a lot of companies like that I think have great products and businesses that haven't had the right handholding and haven't, had the right team in place to have a successful crowdfund and tell the successful story about their product to the masses.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like that's a good place to kind of start. Like, first, there's different types of crowdfunding, right? There's Reg A, Reg CF. What's the difference between those two? And like, what do you recommend a company, do first?
Yeah. So there's three types of equity crowdfunding. One's called Regulation D. That's Rule 506C to get into the sort of details. And you can raise essentially an unlimited amount of capital from accredited investors. Those are people who have a certain net worth or make a certain amount of money per year. There's no sort of SEC requirements beyond filing a document with the SEC once you've closed yours. Hey, we've raised this much, signed by the directors of the company. Relatively easy. Think of that as like a private placement, but public. So you can market it online. You can market it on the other. So the main two. So when you think of traditional equity crowdfunding, there's one called Regulation CF and Regulation A+. Regulation CF, which stands for Regulation Crowdfunding, allows a company to raise up to $5 million a year from the general public. So they don't have to be accredited investors. There are some rules around income and how much you can invest, but it's essentially you can raise money from people off the street. It could be $1 a share. You can take credit card payment. With that, you don't need any sort of SEC review before you start raising money. You have to have audited or reviewed financials. You have to have typically a broker or someone like a broker review the offering. And then you go ahead and market the offering and you take money. So you have to check the boxes, but the SEC says, you know what, if you've checked these boxes and you file things with us, we don't review the offering, but because it's only $5 million, you can start to raise, and best of luck. Regulation A+ or Reg A allows you to raise $75 million every 12 months from the general public. But because you're allowed to raise more than $5 million or up to $75 million, you have to file a document with the SEC, and they assign you an examiner, much like the S1 process for going public. And the examiner reviews your offering documents, and there's a back and forth sort of process with them that could take a month. It could take 6 months because the SEC wants to make sure that you have the right disclosures in there, that you're putting all the right info. And that, of course, is because they, ultimately they're trying to protect the investor. Right, they're trying to protect the average Joe from making sure that they're not investing in something that is fraudulent or, doesn't have the right disclosures. So all these filings, for example, have risk factors. This is risky. Startup investments are risky, so on and so forth. So those are the types of 2-1s, Reg CF, Reg A. Typically Reg CF, it's a great way for companies to kind of dip their toes into the process. You could start with the Reg CF, raise $1 million or $2 million, maybe as a seed, pre-seed sort of round.
Why Reg CF versus, let's say, a Reg A where you just raise, let's say, 30 or 40 mil? Like, why would you say start with Reg CF?
It's timeline. So Reg CF is a lot faster. You can get a Reg CF live in a month potentially, and the cost. So there's less legal sort of due diligence costs to doing a Reg CF versus a Reg A plus. A Reg A plus could be $50,000 to $75,000 in sort of extra legal fees to get live, and there's a timeline versus a longer timeline versus a Reg CF could be $10,000, $15,000 of sort of due diligence legal fees to get live.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay, so that's interesting, and I think I think it makes sense too. Like, I think for a lot of things, whether it's sales or product, I'm a big believer in like quick, short tests and then like doubling down. And so is your advice essentially, because of the time it gets to set up and the money involved, you say go with a Reg CF and like try aiming for like $1 million or $2 million?
Yeah, exactly. And the nice thing about the Reg CF is because you're not doing SEC approval, you can start and stop those rounds relatively easy. There's some nuances there, but you could say, let's say you want to raise $5 million. You could do your first round at $1 million, set it at a sort of reasonable valuation, do it faster, fill up the round, and then, and then open up your next round for $2 or $3 million, show progress in the business, and, say, hey, we raised $1 million. This is what we did with that $1 million. We oversubscribed the round. Now we're coming back to the crowd to raise more. And so I think Reg CF is great because it allows founders to sort of stair step the fundraising process. And $5 million is a lot of money. Like that's quite a bit of capital for startups. That $5 million.
You can do a lot with that.
Yeah, that $5 million limit used to be $1,070,000. And a few years ago, it was increased to $5 million. And that's been that's caused a huge amount of increased interest in equity crowdfunding, because $1 million was kind of like, pre-seed, it's sort of a little bit of money, but maybe I should just do Kickstarter. But $5 million is really meaningful capital for it.
Got it. Now, the one thing that founders are not aware of, like, is that these processes are kind of capital intensive. So if they decide to go like with a Reg CF, what's the kind of money they should be setting aside, like between, the valuation, the broker dealer, we'll get into investor acquisition in a moment, but just setting things up from a legal financial standpoint, like what can they expect?
Yeah, I'd say for a Reg CF, you're looking at, and this includes sort of, most of the funding portals or sort of technology providers have some sort of upfront cost. It could be as low to get live. And again, you also need to do what's called a financial review or financial audit. I'd say at a minimum, any founder should expect sort of upfront costs to get live. Could be as low as $15,000 to $20,000, but could be as high as $50,000 to $60,000 if you have to do that financial audit, right? So the review or the audit, the financial piece is pretty important, because again, the SEC is all about disclosure and making sure your financials are presented in GAAP format. They're reviewed by someone. So that's sort of the legal and financial, or rather accounting costs to get live. And then of course, as you know, there's investor acquisition, which is a whole nother to discuss and consideration.
Absolutely. Yeah, I want to get to that. But before I do, so the cost to set up is like not terrible. It's not like it's going to wipe your, again, and tell me if I'm wrong. Some companies, equity crowdfundings are kind of their last shot. It is what it is. My thing though is that, like, if you're in a point where 20 to 30K is going to determine whether your company stays open or not, I don't think this is the route to go. Just because at that point you start making really bad short-term decisions. It's just a recipe for disaster. That's just my perspective. I mean, I don't know if you feel the same way.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, first of all, you shouldn't be making any sort of crucial decision if for your company, if $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 is sort of your make or break for the company. I absolutely agree. I think that there has been a stigma traditionally in equity crowdfunding where it was the last resort for companies, but that's changed a lot. You're seeing all sorts of companies. Yeah, you're seeing all sorts of companies explore the space. Substack is raising on WeFunder, which is
Yeah, Substack raised I think 8 or 9 million.
They have a wait list, I believe, right now because
Yeah.
they're doing a Reg CF. But yeah, I mean that's exciting to see. I always tout back. It's been a little while now, but a company called BrewDog, which is a Scottish brewery, is sort of the white paper for success in equity crowdfunding. They raised about $100 million, mostly in the UK. They've done some in the US. And their great thing was, so first of all, they have sort of a wholesale business, but they have a ton of breweries. Their whole thing for a while was invest $50, which was one share, and you get a free beer for life on your birthday at any of their bars.
Oh, that's
Right?
smart.
Things like that, right? Like who goes to the bar by themselves on their birthday, and who, if they go, who's having one beer, right? So they kind of use it as a bit of a customer acquisition tool.
But see, that's very smart. I think that this is the thing that's lacking in medtech, which is to think about the cost of customer acquisition and everything. The other thing I liked about equity crowdfunding, which just like coincidentally when I was helping a company with one, it just kind of hit me where I was like, hypothetically, or not hypothetically, legally, you can't market to accredited investors. But if you're doing an equity crowdfunding raise, it's in the public. And so while you're trying to raise money from the crowd, it's very likely that a accredited investor comes to the company outside of the raise and says, hey, I want to put in $500,000, $1 million, $5 million outside of this. So you're able to like kind of accomplish like, more than one thing, which I really, really like. Other thing I wanted to ask you about is some companies get this, I think they're misled to think that like, hey, if you put a really high valuation, it's just like printing money. Me personally, again, people aren't stupid. And especially in the medtech world, like the people who are going to likely fund your company, aside from the general public, are people who are working in the industry, like, medtech professionals and physicians who understand stock, right? And so if you put this really high valuation to the company, I think you're shooting yourself in the foot. I mean, what's your take on the valuation, and what's your advice to founders when they're trying to set that?
That's a great point. So one of the great things about equity crowdfunding is that the founders can pretty much set their own valuation. That's also one of the bad things about equity, because you can get too greedy and set your valuation at X. And then let's say you keep crowdfunding, right? I've talked about the strategy of continue to ratchet, like split it up into smaller rounds. And then of course you want to increase the valuation if you're growing the company and advancing the business. But if you start too high, it's just this sort of like snowball effect where you're going to continue to grow and grow and grow. And then, from what I've seen it from my own companies as well, as the sort of, there ends up being a reckoning where, let's say, a sophisticated investor, not sophisticated, but a more traditional or industry specific investor wants to put a larger check size in. Well, they're going to want either a deal, but they also may not be willing to pay as much as the crowd's been paying. So you have this scenario where there could be a significant down round, which is not good for anybody. It's certainly not good for your investors. Or if you get sort of too high on your valuation, you end up going public, and then there's sort of, sometimes there's a pop at the beginning, but recently there isn't, and and then all of a sudden you have a lot of unhappy investors who may have put money in at, making this up, $100 a share, but then when you IPO, it's at 75 or $50 a share, and that's not a good story to tell as well. So I agree with you. I think you need to be reasonable when you're raising capital and setting valuation from the crowd. I think there is an argument to the crowd may be willing to pay a bit more of a premium than traditional investors, but you certainly don't want to get too greedy where you're marking it up too much, because it can be a downward spiral.
Yeah. Well, and then last thing, and I kind of want to, we'll move forward, but like when you're dealing with, and again, for all intents and purposes, I had you on the show just because, you have a very good reputation, somebody who I respect a lot, spoke very highly of you. So I wanted you to have him on the show. This is why I tell founders, like, whether it's you or somebody else, but let's use you and Atlas in this case, that's why it's better to go to somebody who's going to help quarterback these things, because essentially it's going to accelerate timelines and, more importantly, help you avoid making really, really bad decisions that are going to cost you. And you're going to lose time and money. You can't undo those things. But at the beginning, like when somebody's doing all this, what's a really common mistake you see somebody making? Like I'll give you like an example on my end from the marketing side. I think a really common mistake that people make is going with an like investor acquisition where they're paying a lot of money up front without results being proven, and now they're kind of stuck there, right? On the broker dealer side, the financial side, everything, which I know nothing about. What's a common mistake you see founders making?
I think that's a great question. So not on the marketing side, but sort of the finance. I think it's deal terms, and I think there's oftentimes founders who, for example, are told, yeah, you need to raise money. You should raise money via SAFE or a convertible note, because that's standard, right? When we're not ready to price around, you tend to go for a SAFE because it's kind of a nice way to punt valuation until a later time.
For the audience, can you define the SAFE note?
Yeah, absolutely. So a SAFE is what's called a simple agreement for future equity. It's like a convertible note. And what it is you're taking money in from somebody, and you're essentially saying that once we raise a traditional financing round where we have a lead investor and we're pricing the round, and we're saying this company's worth $100 million, that SAFE essentially says, once you have that traditional fundraising round, people who invested through the SAFE are either getting a discount on the future round, or the valuation on the future round is sort of capped at a certain amount. So it's essentially it's like a discount coupon that can be redeemed later. It's very traditional for early stage startups who can't value themselves, right? If you have no revenue, or you're still you're kind of in the early days of your product development cycle, it's tough to value any company, right? And so a SAFE essentially punts that decision down the line, but it gives the early investors a bit of a discount on that future round. That doesn't always work well for crowdfunding, because you got to remember, equity crowdfunding folks, they're not necessarily sophisticated investors, and in the sense of, they don't know what a SAFE is, they don't know what a convertible note is. They understand share price, right? They understand, I'm buying this many shares for this much money. And so I see a lot of founders do a SAFE, and it doesn't always perform as well as if they were to price the round and give it a share price. And you can sell things like common stock, right? You don't need to sell preferred stock. You can sell common stock to the crowd, and that tends to be a great kind of intermediate point between pricing the round and selling preferred, or doing a SAFE note. So that that's one thing that I see a lot of founders make mistakes on, because they're just given the wrong advice.
Right. Other than that, is there any other tips that you would give founders when it comes to, setting up the crowdfunding? So again, just to kind of like repeat back in summary, your thing is, go with something that's easier to set up, lower cost and easier milestone to hit, which is a Reg CF. Set it for like 1 or 2 mil, right? Maybe 5 mil at the upper limit, but your thing is like 1 or 2 mil, so you can get a quick win. And then just price the round. Don't do a SAFE or convertible note so it's less confusing.
Yeah, that's really, and I think at a high level, you have to remember, if you're an executive at a company raising money traditionally, that's almost your full-time job. When you're fundraising, that's really important. And you also need to grow the business, though. You have to focus on running the business, and that can be very stressful. And so when you're fundraising, the business often gets neglected, or vice versa, right? It's tough to be everywhere at once. Equity crowdfunding is a great way for a CEO to delegate fundraising to someone else, whether it's internal to the company or a firm like Atlas Road or whoever. Equity crowdfunding is very programmatic, right? You're essentially setting up an e-com business, right? With investor acquisition, there's a lot of moving pieces. You don't need the CEO running that whole process. The CEO can focus on developing the product, focusing on business development, so on and so forth, and outsource the equity crowdfunding piece to someone else. And I think a lot of founders don't realize that, and they launch an equity crowdfunding campaign, and they basically ignore it. They also don't make the right decisions when they're setting it up. And I see a ton of failures because, again, it goes back to that sort of analogy of, if I'm a doctor who's created this great product, I potentially don't know much about setting up an e-com site, and that's what crowdfunding is. And so I think if you are getting into space, of course, we'd love for them to work with Atlas Road, but even then, just know that you should delegate somebody within your company who lives and breathes the fundraise, because again, it's a 24/7 operation. You're raising money online. The store is always open. You need somebody to have the finger on the pulse. And if you don't, then your fundraise could fail.
God, yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Now, let's talk about the most interesting part, which for me is investor acquisition, aka the marketing agency that's going to essentially help brand and run traffic to the investment page. My take on it, and again, I'm wondering how you feel about it. I think that just like, for example, I did a very successful Kickstarter many, many years ago, and so paid advertisement has its place. Like you need that. My thing is it's just like commercializing a product. If you have a product that you're selling, whether it's a robotic system to a hospital or a little widget that's like an e-com thing, if the only way you can sell it is through paid advertising, that becomes very expensive and it takes a long time, right? And I think that great investor acquisition involves, PR, it involves thought leadership, from the CEO online, webinars, all these things, and then paid ads supplements and augments those things. Versus some IA, all they do is paid ads, and I just feel like that's a very, very slippery slope to spending a lot of money and not getting a return. That's my take. I'm wondering your thoughts and your advice to founders on it. So that's like the most important thing is the IA, right?
Yeah, right. So if you're fundraising and if you're not a B2C business, you have to rely on somebody to bring leads to your company, and it's paid ads is kind of traditionally been it, and that's still the case. And yeah, I think, listen, if you're trying to raise 500,000 to $1 million, you can probably rely on sort of Instagram and Facebook and TikTok to get you there because you're not trying to raise that much. But if you're trying to raise 3 to 4 to 5 to 10 to 20 million, it's good. Programmatic social and search ads is just part of your whole repertoire. And yeah, it's a whole ecosystem. It's a whole funnel, right? So you're potentially using paid ads and press to bring people in top of funnel, right? Just get them in there. You could be doing podcasts. You could be doing some television stuff. There's some things you can do there. You sort of use that to bring them in. But yeah, to your point, you need the sort of right marketing funnel on the email side. So you're hitting people up and converting them down the funnel. You need to have an overall marketing strategy that is nurturing them throughout the process on sort of organic stuff. And you're doing storytelling, right? You're asking somebody to put in $2,000 or $3,000 in a company. They're not gonna invest by seeing one ad. They're gonna get in your funnel and they want to be wined and dined kind of electronically, right? They want to be
absolutely
told a story. They want to see progress in the business. Webinars are an amazing thing as well. Because then you get the sort of people, you may only have 50 to 100 people on your webinar, but those people are sort of qualified leads and they've made it there. And that's a big part of converting them, right? You potentially have paid to get them in the funnel. Now they're the bottom of the funnel. They see a webinar, they see some sort of email about progress in the business. That gets them sort of over the hump. The other thing you got to think about is sort of a great investor relations firm, customer service firm who's there to sort of help navigate the process as well. Even if there's technical issues, hey, I can't click here, the credit card doesn't work, or my wire instructions aren't working. People want their hands held because, again, you got to remember, people are putting in a few hundred or a few $1,000s in your deal.
Yeah, and a lot of time might be their first time they're ever doing that. There's a lot of people I think who they've never even purchased public stock, so this is the first time they're investing in anything.
Yeah, and they may want to speak with someone because they're having issues with how to sign the subscription agreement. I tell everyone this story. It's equity crowdfunding is high AOV, average order value, high cart size, high average order value e-commerce. Your average order could be $1,000 to $2,000. And I always tell people, I said, tell me one e-commerce site that has an AOV, average order value, of $2,000. I don't know if you can, maybe like Louis Vuitton, right? Louis Vuitton is probably one of the few. And I can tell you I haven't purchased there, but I bet you they have damn good customer service, right?
Oh, absolutely. And even the sites that I've been to where, I have a home gym. So there's sites that have equipment that's like $900,000. Billions and billions of dollars are abandoned in carts every year in e-com. And so even when I get a little bit far, I have emails that follow up with me to educate me, to kind of move me forward, right? To just make me essentially all this retargeting, the ads, the follow-up, everything, all of it is making me more comfortable to give somebody my money, Right. And versus e-com where it's like, okay, I'm going to pay for this. I'm going to get this thing in the mail in a week or two. This is an investment. So like you're trying to get somebody to give you money where they don't know what's going to happen with it.
Exactly. And as a follow through, you want to make sure your audience, your investor base is an asset. And you want to keep them updated on the business after the fundraise is closed. Because
why is that? Can you go into the details? Why is that?
Well, first of all, it's the right thing to do, right? If somebody puts in 25K, 100K, in my mind, they're just as important as the guy who put in 1,000K. Now, you don't have to necessarily, not 1,000K, 1K. You don't have to necessarily get on the phone with all of them, but you should be giving them updates quarterly or at least twice a year. Hey, this is what we've been up to. First of all, you never know if you're going to need a fundraise from them again. Second of all, of course, it's the right thing to do. And third, I can't tell you, it was funny. So we had at one of my companies, we had a guy who invested online, put like $2,000-3,000 in. Then we ended up posting on our LinkedIn that we were hiring for a head of customer service. And he heard about it and applied. right? And he applied because he was like in our funnel and like an investor. And I just thought that was a really cool story. Like, obviously, we probably saved on some headhunting fees by hiring this guy. It was a very senior role, but I think it was a great story because when you put yourself out there and you're raising money, you're out there in the public and you're marketing yourself. And even if you don't get somebody who ends up investing, there's a huge halo effect to putting on that varnish, putting together that storytelling for your business and marketing yourself to the crowd, because you don't know what else is going to come from it.
Exactly. And this is kind of why I like equity crowdfunding, is because it accomplishes many things at once. Like for me, my business, I really focus on the value of like a network effect on social media, you know? And so by doing this, you're addressing the fundraising sides, you're covering all the storytelling aspects that are needed to raise money from the crowd, which is very different from an institutional investor, right? Number two, like you're technically doing this so that you can attract potential customers. And the other halo effect is like attracting potential employees. So you solve for all of these things. And I really like that a lot. You know, the other side of it is, you know, you do have, I love the VCs in my industry, but for every one VC in my industry, there's like like 9 or 10 worthless ones. And the reason why I say they're worthless is that they'll go to a founder, they'll give you a bad valuation, they'll want a board seat to have influence and control on your company. And then it's like, okay, can you give me operating advice? No, because you were never an operator. Okay, so that's out the window. Can you make some introductions to potential customers? No, so you're worthless on the commercial side. So a lot of times I talk to founders, I'm like, okay, you're going to get like a check for $1, $5, $10 million from this VC. What are you giving up in return for that amount of money? And what are you getting back? Like not much. Versus with equity crowdfunding, you can get some very loyal people. And this is at least my thesis, is that if you end up with like even 100 medical device reps, medical device professionals who invest in your crowdfund, they're going to try and drive business to you. They're going to try and connect you with people. I mean, they'll get very active. I think that's one of the beneficial sides of B2B equity crowdfunding that you don't get from a traditional VC.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And I mean, and again, having done it, like, you know, we had one time where we were doing twice actually for two of my robotics companies, where we were fundraising, marketing, there was press and all that, and we got sort of two cold emails. One to our press email address, one through our sort of generic contact us on the website, of two huge global companies that were interested in becoming clients or partners of ours. And that because they saw an ad, they saw press, where normally our companies wouldn't have done press or ads at that stage, but they saw it because we were putting it out there for crowdfunding. And all of a sudden it became a business development sort of potential customer acquisition channel as well, which was super cool.
And you know, that's again, everything's going to be different, but the one thing I like about equity crowdfunding is that it solves this problem of top of funnel that every startup needs to have. Top of funnel for investors, top of funnel for customers, and top of funnel for employees. Because let's face it, especially as a startup, if you're doing anything that's remotely high tech, you're competing with really competitive companies, not just Google's, but like there are tech startups that I know of that have very competitive salaries, really great benefits, great culture, everything. Like you're competing with that. So like, how do you get the attention of a potential employee? So it solves this top of funnel issue that every startup's going to have, you know? When it comes to investor acquisition, like how do you like to evaluate IA firms? Like what are 2 or 3 things that's your litmus test?
Yeah, I think there's sort of two. One is, I cannot tell you how many times I've spoken with people who've looked at crowdfunding or actually in crowdfunding, and they've been sort of overpromised what their return on ad spend would be, because the firm or agency they were speaking with was frankly clueless. And again, I've been around the block. I've seen 2-to-1 ROAS, right, which means for every dollar you spend, you get $2 in. I've seen 20-to-1 ROAS. For every dollar you spend on ads, you get and you know, you get these sort of investor acquisition firms or marketing firms that you can get 10-to-1, 20-to-1, and you know, again, I can call BS when I hear it. So that's the first thing, and I've spoken with pretty much all the agencies out there. I think the other thing is, you ask them what sort of channels they use for investor acquisition. If they just talk about Facebook, Instagram, Google, TikTok as the sort of main channels, then you know there's something not quite right there. Because again, unless you're raising a few $100,000, you're going to need to find other channels and other tools in your tool shed to have a successful campaign. Just like sort of the ecom 2.0 days, which, you know, people thought they could scale their businesses from Instagram and Facebook. That's not the case anymore with ecom, and it's the same. It's the same in equity crowdfunding now. You need to rely on other sources to have a successful.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I completely agree because again, it's I think people forget that like what often worked really well, like even a couple of years ago, the market and technology is moving so fast, and so you have to just change along with it. I mean, look, even for me, as like a perfect example for because I try and explain this to founders all the time. Things change so much faster than you realize. So for me, I have a course. Okay, well, a year ago, I was able to just run a basic webinar, like automated webinar. People watch the webinar and then they click and they buy the course. That doesn't work anymore. People aren't watching webinars as much as they used to, right? I used to be able to have full one-time payments. Now, because of like Amazon and Affirm and everything, not only do I have to offer a payment plan, I have to offer a no interest payment, right? And so I think also on the other side, like let's look at Monogram. What worked for Monogram, which they raised that 20 million like maybe a year ago or two, it's not the same thing. And on top of it, I think people have to understand is like different company, different product, different audience. There's all these variables that people don't account for, And I think maybe part of this is that as a founder, like you're really hoping that an IA, an investor acquisition firm, is got like the magic wand for you, and it's never the case,
Yeah, you have to completely reinvent yourself, especially if you're gonna, raise in the millions. Because what worked well for you the first million may not work well for you the second or third million. And it could be a new investor acquisition firm, it could be new marketing assets, it could be new storytelling. That there's 1,000 different things. I mean, for one of our fundraisers, we just did a mini brand refresh where because people are used to seeing the same ads, right, on Facebook, and it's like they got bored, and so just like what we did was we did a light brand refresh, and I tweaked up the logo, tweaked up the coloring, did a new photo shoot. And again, that wasn't necessarily a thing that like solved all the world's problems, but that certainly helped us. And that's the thing.
It definitely does.
Yeah, that's the same with ecom, right? Having spent years in ecom, you got to have new creative out there. And you also can't be stingy on it. It's one of my
I told, man, you hit a sensitive topic for me. Yes, because what the one thing that nobody factors in, the cost of creative. Nobody factors that in,
Yeah. So again, having come to the ecom world, one of my former business partners, he was on the creative side and for our company, and he'd say, "Hey, I need to do a photo shoot. Hire some models, kind of, run a photo thing and shoot the new product." And he said, "I got two quotes. I got one. These are rough numbers, right? I got one that was $2,000, $1,000, bare bones, right, to get it done." He's like, "But I got another one, great. So if I'm going to hire a photographer, I, found some better model, better lighting. It's going to be $5,000." And of course, on the sort of finance side, I'd say, "Well, why do we need to spend twice as much?" And he's like, "You know what, Kevin? We're going to be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on ads with these assets, with these images. A few $1,000 is going to, it's going to produce such a better visual product. And those ads are going to work even more efficiently if we did it that way." And he's right. And he was right. It's, if you're spending significant amounts of capital marketing your fundraise, don't be stingy on a video or images, because those are only the better quality images and better quality marketing assets are only going to make your ad dollars more efficient. They're going to make your offering look a lot better. And that's going to pay dividends over time. Plus, just because you're investing in marketing assets for your fundraise, you can use those for your business as well. And I think people think, "Oh, well, I have this great product," right? It goes back to my original kind of analogy. I have this great product. I don't need to invest in storytelling assets to the crowd because it's a great product. But again, that doesn't always translate.
No, absolutely. And I think, the one thing that founders need to be wary of is like, don't be like penny wise, but pound foolish when it comes to these things. And I think marketing is a really great example of that. I got a controversial question. You may not want to answer it, but I'm going to try my best to get you to answer it. There's all these platforms. You have, so Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank, he's heavily invested in Start Engine. You have Dealmaker, Republic. There's a lot of what are your favorite ones? And then, if possible, what's one that you just don't like at all? You don't have to tell us the one you don't like, but what's your favorite one and why?
Oh,
and
gosh,
for those listening, we're talking about the platform that you actually list your offering. People go and you have like a landing page. It explains the story, the investment, everything, and they literally invest there. What's your favorite ones?
Yeah, so I think to to explain a little bit more to the audience, you have the platforms and you have the white label. Think of the white label providers as kind of like the Shopify equivalent for crowdfunding, right?
Would that be like a CoreConX?
Yeah, CoreConX, Issuance, Dealmaker. I've worked with Dealmaker quite a bit. Work with Issuance kind of currently on a deal. Those are the ones who they provide you the technology and sort of infrastructure to get set up, but you have to figure out a lot on your So, and then you look at the portals. So Start Engine, WeFunder, Republic are sort of the big three ones. They're a bit more like selling your product on Amazon. It's a bit more plug and play. They kind of handle, Amazon handles your logistics, and they kind of, in theory, bring you an audience and, kind of handle the payments piece. But again, with the portals, you don't sort of get access to all of the data, and you don't get to reap all the benefits, but it's a little easier to launch on them, right? They bring a built-in audience. If you work with like a Dealmaker and those folks, you get access to all the data. You get extreme transparency and everything. You get to own all the customer information, but it's a little harder to set up, right? Because, with like a Start Engine or WeFund or Republic, they help you build the deal page. They help a lot of the operations behind the scenes. I think which route is the best to take. It really depends on the industry, how much you're looking to raise. I found traditionally that if you're looking to raise a smaller amount, let's call it kind of $1-ish million, the portals, so the Start Engines and WeFunders and Republics, make a lot more sense because there are fixed costs with standing up your own sort of Shopify equivalent, right? And the numbers don't always pencil out. So it may make sense for you to work with an existing portal. The nice thing about these portals too is they have a built-in audience, right? They can have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of email ads, and those people will see your deal. So, there is a lot of benefits to working with them. But again, if you're looking to raise substantial amounts of capital, like you look at Monogram is a great example. They originally raised on Seed Invest and they raised a bit on Start Engine. Now they're working with Dealmaker and they have their own website right now because they've been raising for so long. They want to reap all the benefits of their marketing. They want to make sure that every ad dollar that they spend attracting an eyeball goes to their deal versus if it were on a portal, it may go somewhere else to another deal, right? Or to another company trying to raise. But you can have the best of both worlds. There's plenty of companies. I've done it for one of my companies, which closes Friday. We raised through Dealmaker, and we're also raising on Republic, right, at the same time. And you can kind of do that. You can you're able to sort of pick and choose.
And is it mainly just to get access to the different email lists?
Exactly. Yeah, to get access to the audience.
Do you feel like because those audiences are primarily funding like B2C projects, do you feel like there is a little bit of a risk, like with not just a B2B offering, but like a MedTech offering, like what it could be, that it may or may not be the best route to go, like to have access to all those emails?
No, there's plenty of companies that have raised on the portals that are B2B businesses or MedTech. Again, it just goes back to like how compelling and clear the story is, right? Exactly. Yeah, it goes, and there is an argument for, if you are B2C, to actually raising on a Dealmaker or an Issuance because your customer information is so important for you, and so is your investor information.
Oh, for retargeting, yeah.
Yeah, all those things, right? And again, it's that whole theory of like investors can become customers and customers can become investors, and you want to own all that. That's one of your biggest assets as a direct consumer business. And that's one of the pros of you working with a white label product like a Dealmaker or an Issuance. Because you get access to you get to see where everyone is in every step of the checkout process through equity crowdfunding.
Right. On the side of investor acquisition, like Dealmaker and some of these platforms offer that service. And just for context, a lot of investor acquisition, it'll cost anywhere from like 12 to upwards of like $30K, whether you go with Dealmaker or somebody else per month, right? That's not including ad spend. Do you prefer to go with the investor acquisition that these platforms offer? Do you prefer to separate that and go with somebody, or it just depends? How do you look at it?
Yeah, I've worked with some of the in-house agencies, right? With Dealmaker. Dealmaker Reach is their in-house agency. I think they're fantastic at what they do. There's also a lot of independent agencies that do well. And I think, again, it goes back to how much you're looking to raise, what industry you're in, because it's again, going back to my sort of e-com history, we cycled through a number of agencies when I was there because you learn from new agencies. You learn from different agencies. If you switch agencies, they may bring a new sort of strategy or direction that your campaign needs at that time. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing you got to think about is that's another cost for fundraising is you may be paying a sort of fixed fee per month for an agency in addition to the ad spend, or you may be paying a percentage of spend. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of good ones out there. And it really depends on sort of different factors, where you're raising and how much you're raising.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. And I think also, at least for me on the marketing side, evaluating the agencies based on their strengths, I think is really important. I mean, for me personally, like if you're doing a raise on for MedTech, like, I think every agency, it's going to be negligible how much better one agency is compared to another on, for example, Facebook and Instagram marketing. Like, I think it's negligible. I think where it really counts is like their ability to market on new platforms that people aren't used to running ads. So like LinkedIn is one, TikTok is another, and then also their success rate, like with previous companies like that. So like you can go to an IA firm that's done a great job raising a bunch of money for companies, but if they haven't positioned like a medtech company, in my eyes, like that's always a risk. That doesn't mean that they can't be successful, but like, medtech is very, very different than, let's say, an e-com, right? But there's, I don't know, on the flip side, there's a part of me where I feel like if you go to somebody who's only doing medtech, then they have a bias towards that, and you might miss some really interesting creative strategies that an e-com one might. So I at that point, like it's just really tough to tell. Do you recommend having a fixed amount of time that you're with an IA firm? Like, do you say commit to one for like 6 months, for 3 months, and evaluate? Because these things, they take time, but then you also don't want to be committed to like a full year and they're not producing results. Like, how do you evaluate that?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because a lot of these fundraisers, you'll find that most of the money comes in at the end, right?
Yeah,
for
yeah.
the agency,
and
so
is it mainly because the close is happening, so there's like a scarcity bias that happens, and people are like, oh, I better put my money in now because it's going to end soon?
That's exactly it. And so you could have an agency that performing well or not performing well, and your sort of middle or early campaign metrics are decent, right? Maybe you're sort of acquiring leads, you're acquiring visitors efficiently, but you really don't know until the dust settles at the end of the campaign. And because again, there's the scarcity factor. You're asking people to put in a lot of money, and so you may see some results, but it's a tough one. You need to choose the right agency, and you may not know until after the campaign is over. And if you switch agencies mid race, you may be making the wrong decision, because again, you just have to wait until the end of the campaign. So I don't know. That's a tough one. I'd say make sure you do your due diligence when you're speaking with them. Make sure you get sort of, if they're promising them if they're promising the world in terms of ROAS, you should really look at that and question that. You brought up a really
what would
good point.
Be promising the world? What would be a red flag for you?
Yeah, I can get you a 10-to-1 ROAS, right? 10-to-1 return on ad spend.
Just like that. Yeah, I agree. Anytime somebody says that without taking, anytime the less conservative people are, the less I trust them, because like everything's going to be different. So if they say like, hey, we've done anywhere from like 8 to 12 to 1 in previous deals, here's what it looks like, but it's gonna be different, I can respect that. But anytime I hear somebody saying like their main pitch is like, we can get you 10 to 1, I'm like, I don't care who they are, don't use them.
Yeah. Watch out for that. And they're just trying to sell you, right? They're just trying to bring you in and hook, because you're right. I mean, as I mentioned, once they kind of hook you, it is tough to switch agencies midstream. I think you brought up a really good point about industry, right? If they've worked with, they don't have to necessarily, if you're in medtech, they don't have to necessarily have done only medtech deals, but like, they hopefully have done some in the industry, or some in some complementary industry, because telling the story of a healthcare medtech firm to the crowd is a lot different than telling the story of a consumer goods business or an alcohol business, right?
What the other thing I feel like founders make a mistake of when it comes to, I mean, not just equity crowdfunding, just regular market, but especially equity crowdfunding, is this thought of underestimating how long certain things will take. And so if a new company, let's say, starts with an IA firm, right? And that company, let's say, has like some marketing assets and everything, but really the IA firm has to kind of work on messaging, all these things. How long conservatively do you feel like it should take before ads start running? Because I think some founders are like, hey, let's start running ads like in a week or two. And I think that's not fair to an IA firm, but like on average, like again, what's your timeline usually?
You mean, and sorry, just to clarify, you mean what's the timeline from engaging the firm to getting ads live, or
Yeah, exactly. Because I think that a lot of founders underestimate how long that process takes, and they want ads and money coming in immediately. And my thing is like, it's better to have a slower, more methodical approach. Have really getting it. Same with the assets, right? It's like spend the money and time to have really good assets, because you're spending tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars running ads again, right? So my again, all things being equal, my thing is like at least like it's going to take minimum 2 months, I think, to get assets, to get ads going, everything. Like, don't expect ads to start running in a month, but I don't know. I could be wrong there. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes, if you're a CEO and you've said, I'm running the equity crowdfunding process, I'm overseeing it, like, you're busy with other stuff. So naturally, just in general, things are going to take longer, whether it's the audit or the marketing assets or setting up, onboarding the agency. I think one of the things is I've seen plenty of people who are ready to launch. This is sort of a funny anecdote. People who are ready to start spending on ads, and they do, and then their Facebook account is sort of limited to $50 a day of ad spend, right? And you don't want to figure that out or find that out when your deal's live, because if you started your launch and you only have a limited window, the last thing you want is to not hit the ground running on ads. But you also want to make sure that, to your point, you have the right assets and you're being thoughtful about how you ramp up ad spend, how you test things, because you certainly don't want to blow all your money in the first week and spend $1,000, $2,000 a day and find out later you don't have the right targeting, and you don't have the right creative in place. So I think it goes back to when you start the process of equity crowdfunding and you onboard with your broker and you start your review, the marketing piece should have that parallel path. You need to start planning a month or 2 months in advance so that when you launch, all the pistons are firing and everything's set up properly.
Yeah. And I think, again, like a lot of founders, especially in my industry, they do not know how ads work, let alone an algorithm. Whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn, I mean, you need at minimum 5 to 7 business days just for the algorithm to start getting a little bit of traction and figure out like how to target, right? And so I think the patience part is it's very, very important. And again, like, I think like one of the themes that we're hearing here is just like nobody has like a magic wand, And I think whether you're dealing with the IA firm or anybody else, anybody who if something just sounds too good to be true, it probably is, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So just to kind of like wrap up, and again, I appreciate you spending time with us. Couple final questions for you. Number one is, if there were like 2 to 3 things that would indicate a company should not do equity crowdfunding, what would those 2 to 3 things be?
Yeah, I think, if you aren't willing to but spend sort of $30,000 to $50,000 to get going, and I lump in some ad spend there as well, then it may not be the right thing for you. Right? It's kind of like, I'm not a big gambler, but if I do gamble, go to Vegas, I'm only going to gamble as much as I'm okay losing. And so, you don't want to go at as like your last resort, and you only have $50K left in your bank account. You feel like, if you lose that money, your company's under, make sure you're okay losing that before you get into the process. I think the other thing is, like I mentioned kind of when we kick things off, is if you have a really esoteric product that's just really hard to explain to the crowd, equity crowdfunding may not be right for you, because your investor acquisition efforts, your ad spend is going to fall flat on its face if if the storytelling fails, right? And I've been pitched companies before that really cool sort of deep healthcare stuff or some SaaS business where I'm like, I get it, but it took me 20 minutes to understand what the company did. Crowdfunding is probably not right. I'd say those are the 2 sort of checks before you kind of dive into crowdfunding.
Got it. I think those are really good to go with. So just kind of finish up, outside of equity crowdfunding, what, these are kind of like rapid fire questions I always like to ask us. What's a podcast or show that you've been sort of checking out recently that you've really enjoyed, if you listen to those things?
Yeah. So I every day I listen to the ABC News has a daily podcast about news. And then The Economist does too. I'm a big news guy. And then I've been listening to this BBC podcast called The Lazarus Group. It's about North Korean hackers. I'm really into like international stuff and sort of news. So those are the ones that I listen to, of course, other than yours.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. And then final question is that, part of being in any industry, especially being successful in it, is this theme around continuing education, listening to podcasts, reading books and everything. Is there a book that you feel like had a meaningful impact on your career that you feel that you gift and recommend most often to others?
Gosh, I'm looking, I have all my books here. I'm like looking, I'm like, what?
Yeah, that's what I do. Anytime I get that question, I look back in my library. I'm like, oh man.
Not throwing me in the spot, but I'm like,
Thank you for enjoying another epic episode of the State of MedTech. If you're feeling inspired and love this episode, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button and turn notifications on so you never miss an episode. And be sure to give us 5 stars and write a short review, because that helps more people discover this amazing community of ours. If you're a company who has an executive that you'd like to be on the show, or perhaps you want to sponsor one of the episodes, shoot us an email at hello@khateebandco.com. Take care.
I find reading as well, it gives me a bit of a disconnect, and then I come back refreshed. So I actually read quite a bit of nonfiction. I'll read some fiction. I read a lot of biographies, historical stuff. And that's nice for me because it gives me the ability to disconnect so that when I come back and do start working, I'm refreshed. So that's my advice. Read what you enjoy, and you'll enjoy what you do.
There we go. No, I wholeheartedly agree. Kevin, really appreciate you coming on the show. And for those who are listening, please check the show notes. Check out Kevin's website, connect with him on LinkedIn. And outside of LinkedIn, is there anywhere else that people can find you, Kevin?
Yeah, you can go to www.atlas-rd.com. It's Atlas Road. Find me on Facebook, Instagram. I think my MySpace page is down. I don't know why. My friend's page is down. But yeah, the usual social channels. But yeah, really appreciate you having me. And yeah, thanks so much.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Be sure to check out Kevin. If you have any questions, go ahead and shoot us a message directly. I'm Omar Khateeb. This has been another episode of the State of MedTech. And don't forget, if you haven't reviewed the show, shame on you. Give us 5 stars and write a review. We're the #1 show in MedTech for a reason, mainly because I stay on top of people for reviewing the show. With that being said, we'll see you all next time.